When we open with deep feelings the glorious historical pages of the past, the pioneering history of the development of Taiwan written by the successive forefathers over the years, we review at the same time the moving and the tragic history written by innumerable heroes with their blood, a fighting history of protecting Taiwan. If we can say that the gunboats of the imperialist knocked open the gates of ancient China, then we can say that 2 or 3 centuries before, foreign invaders had rested their eyes on Taiwan and begun their pillage.
In the mid-16th century, the Japanese feudal lords gathered some desperate warriors on the sea. These people formed bandit gangs, brought calamities, and were rampant for hundreds of years. They were the Japanese pirates, who were well known for their brutality and cruelty. After receiving the smashing blow by the famous anti-pirates general Qi Ji and Yu Da-yo, the Japanese pirates had no hideout left. Some occupied Taipan by using the opportunity that the former Penghu Imperial Inspection Department was removed by the Chinese imperial government. They continued their all-out harassment of the coastal area in Fujian and Guangdong provinces. It was the heroic Pinghu people who for the first time gave the invaders a bloody beating. Pinghu people fought with primitive spears, bows, and arrows against the Japanese pirates, who had superior cannons. At last, the Japanese pirates were forced to retreat to the remote mountains, but they still took risk to fight desperately and never gave in.
In 1601, 7 Japanese battleships attacked areas along the coastal line of Fujian and Zhejiang provinces. They attempted to capture the territory, kill the local people, and rob the property of the people there. However, they were defeated by the imperial soldiers of the Ming dynasty and ran to Taiwan. The Fujian military officer Shen Yorong led the waterborne forces, took 14 battleships to pursue the enemy running to Taiwan. 6 battleships of the Japanese pirates were destroyed. Hundreds of country fellows captured by the pirates were rescued. When Shen Yorong and his army landed on the island, the Pinghu people welcomed the soldiers with rice and soup. It was the first time that the Chinese army made the active attack. It was also the first time that the Chinese army recaptured Taiwan from the foreign invaders. The scholar general of Fujian province, Cheng Di, vividly described the glorious battle in his well-known historical writing, Battle in the East.
On the cliff wall of the Southern Puto Temple in Xiamen, people can still see the carvings left by Shen Youren and Chen Di when they toured there at that time. These lines express their fervor and enthusiasm over bravely protecting the territory and heroically fighting the enemy.
When a strange and unprecedented fleet suddenly entered the waters of Taiwan along the newly discovered navigation route from the other half of the earth, the Chinese never expected such a small and strange European country from so far away would bring about such grave and enduring disasters. It was at this time that the Dutch colonialist prevailed and acted like an overlord on the oceans of the world. As soon as this carriage, men on ocean, arrived in Taiwan, their mouths watered for the treasures of the island. People of Taiwan were about to meet their ferocious enemy.
In 1603, the commander-in-chief of the Dutch fleet, Wei Ma Long, attacked Macau for the first time. He built the city wall and moat and camped there after he occupied Penghu. He was quite certain to hold it for some time. However, before the Dutch army held their ground, Shen Youron and his soldiers drove all of them away. In 1622, the commander-in-chief Lei Yuezi of the Dutch expeditionary fleet staged a comeback, occupied Penghu again, and invaded the coastal line along the mainland of China. In 1624, Yu Zigao, son of the famous general Yu Da-yo, led the Chinese troops drive into Penghu. He caught Dutch General Gao Weijin and 11 other officers. The Dutch were forced to tear down their castles. 2,400 Dutch soldiers all fled to Taiwan. It was from this moment that the Chinese treasure island of Taiwan began its Dutch colony history of 38 years.
This was probably the earliest contact and lessons that the Chinese had from Western civilization. During the Dutch occupation of Penghu, the Dutch soldiers willfully attacked peaceful villages and killed innocent people. They ill-treated those locals who were forced to build castles. Records show that among 1,500 laborers, 1,200 were starved to death. Even the Dutch captain, Boulinkuli, confessed without duress. The Dutch introduced themselves to the Chinese as the international pirates.
Have you ever heard of the Dutch East Indian Cooperation? It was not simply a commercial organ engaged in trading activity. The Dutch Parliament went so far as to entrust the cooperation with the rights of organizing troops, building castles, declaring war, making peace, bringing people to trial, and so on. It was entirely a country inside a country. If the Eastern Indian Cooperation ever had any spirit in running its business, that would be the greedy savage and the bloody brutality in way of the capitalist original accumulation.
Almost everyone in Taiwan had heard of the legend of ceding territory with cowhide and can tell it in detail. It's said that the Dutch colonialist hypocritically asked for a piece of land the size of a cowhide from the natives. After the colonialists got permission, they cut the cowhide into a very thin, long string and circled a large piece of good farmland. This is an example of how the crafty and evil Western ways were used to play tricks on the Eastern way of honesty and kindness.
We'll certainly never forget another European pirate which is no less well known than the Dutch, the Spanish colonists. Early in 1571, the Spanish governor in the Philippines regarded Taiwan as the strategic fort in contending for hegemony with Japan in the South Pacific. When the early bird from Holland settled the south of Taiwan, the Spanish were not at all willing to show their weakness. They sent for 12 warships from Luzon, invaded the Keelung port in northern Taiwan, built the city San Domingo, and were going to take equal shares with the Dutch. In 1642, the Dutch seized the chance that the Spanish had some trouble in Luzon and sent for a very powerful fleet. They recaptured the Keelung port and seized the complete area of northern Taiwan. Since then, Taiwan was entirely under the exclusive domination of the Dutch colonists.
However, the Dutch colonialists' 38-year domination over Taiwan was not at all peaceful. From 1640 to 1642, the Gaoshan people raised rebellions 58 times. The Dutch colonists desperately put down the uprisings and brutally murdered the Taiwanese, but they could not stamp out the flames of fury all over the Taiwan island.
Every Mid-Autumn Festival, we can't help thinking of a hero whose name is Guo Huanyi. The slogan, "Kill the Red-Haired Dutch," was raised by him when he launched an anti-Dutch rebellion in 1652. However, the plan fell through and stood exposed. Guo Huanyi decided to rebel 10 days ahead of time. 16,000 people of the Han nationality started the uprising and captured the Chikhan. But their weapons were mere wooden clubs and bamboo poles, which were no match for the rifles and cannons of the Dutch. Large numbers of rebels were killed. Guo Huanyi and the deputy commander-in-chief Wu Hualong died on the battlefield. The crazy Dutch carried out bloody large-scale reprisals in the village of the Han nationality. The local inhabitants were almost all killed, 5,000 of which were women and children.
A great man came at last in the historical storm. He didn't disappoint the Taiwanese and shouldered the heavy task of recovering Taiwan. He was Zheng Chong-gong, the famous general and the unprecedented national hero of Chinese history who held the enemy in awe. When the patriotic old man He Ben dived back from Taiwan to Xiamen and presented the Taiwan military map he surveyed and drew, over the years, Zheng Chong-gong's hope to recover Taiwan became stronger and stronger. In January 1661 of the Chinese lunar calendar, the Chinese Emperor Shunzi passed away. The whole nation was busy with the state mourning and the funeral. Zheng Chong-gong was for the time being relieved of the fear of disturbance from the imperial court. The historical chance of a lifetime came.
On April the 21st, 1661, the warship in which Zheng Chong-gong stayed flew the flag of the commander-in-chief. 25,000 officers and soldiers, with strong determination, took more than 100 warships and set off from Jinmen Island. They advanced straight towards Taiwan. It was the final clear way that the Chinese made towards the Dutch colonists. It was the most magnificent expedition in the history of the Taiwan Strait.
There were two routes in the entrance of Dayuan Bay. The southern one was deep and wide. Big ships could pass easily, but it was blocked by the Dutch army with heavy artillery. The route in the north was shallow and narrow. The colonists never set up defense there. Zheng Chong-gong's fleet seized the opportunity of a rising tide. Led by He Ben, they entered the Dayuan port along Lu'ermen of the northern route. The Dutch in Chikan City were frightened by the troops from the heaven and met them head-on in panic. The Dutch defenders had to surrender and give up the city after all the relief troops were wiped out.
The Dutch governor withdrew to Rezhilan town with an isolated and weak force. He fought back like a cornered beast. Zheng Chong-gong camped his troops and set up castles around the mountain. The supreme headquarters of the Dutch colonists was encircled. An ultimatum was announced politely with the force of justice. Taiwan is the territory of China. It has long been occupied by your country. Since we come to take it back today, you should certainly return it to its owner. This was the declaration to recover the lost territory of a dignified country. It was a sound echoing throughout Chinese history. Besieged for 9 months, the Dutch army suffered many casualties, and there was no other way for them but to surrender. The local Taiwanese rose up to assist the army from the mainland. While trying to dispatch the enforcement soldiers, the colonist troop was exterminated on the way by General Zheng Chong-gong. In February 1662, the cornered Kuei Yi formally signed his name on 2 documents of surrender, which declared the end of 38 years of dark rule of the Netherlands. The sunlight of the motherland was again shining over the Pearl Island, Taiwan. With profound respect, the Taiwanese enshrined General Zheng Chong-gong for his historical recovery of Taiwan with his great talents and superb strategy.
The Opium War ushered in a century of humiliating and sad history. History recorded sufferings and humiliations of the Chinese nation. Taiwan likewise became a profitable slice for those world powers.
From 1441 to 1842, the British Navy invaded the waters of Keelung and Da'an 3 times and was repulsed by the Chinese soldiers and people. Over 100 cruel and evil British soldiers were wiped out. However, conceding to the pressures of the British government, the Qing imperial government removed the anti-British heroes Yao Ying and Da Hong'e and sent them for trials. This aroused the islanders' bitter feelings.
The Japanese desire for Taiwan scarcely died out. In 1871, the Japanese government sought this as an excuse and sent over 3,600 soldiers in the south of Taiwan, intending to exterminate all the Gaoshan minority people in Mudan village. With stones and clubs, the minority people killed over 500 invading soldiers. The chief of the Mudan village and his son were killed in the battle, along with 30 other villagers.
When the Sino-French War broke out, Taiwan became the main sea battleground. Governor Liu Mingchuan led his army to resist the French invasion. More than 100 French soldiers were killed when they landed on the island. After that, he abandoned the port Keelung to trap more enemies. When the proud French soldiers attacked Hue, the Chinese army suddenly came forth and fought the French invaders. More than 300 French soldiers were killed. Hence, the French army was contained. A French author wrote, "This is a place for commemoration. It is a massive, gloomy graveyard for French officers and soldiers."
In Jiawu Sea battle with the Japanese Navy, the Chinese Beiyang Navy was completely destroyed. Frightened out of their wits, the Qing imperial government hurriedly signed Maguan Treaty with Japan. Hence, Penghu Island was ceded from Taiwan. Upon hearing the news, the whole of the country was in uproar. Over 600 examinees for official post presented their petitions for more battles against the Japanese. Echoing the calls of the people, the poet Huang Zunxian wrote his famous verse in protest. The Shen Daily issued a declaration to express people's anger of the government's impotence. In Taiwan, overwhelming compatriots vowed to fight to the last drop of blood for the land. The whole of China was weeping and roared in awe.
Though facing the internal struggle and corruption in the Qing government, the Japanese troops couldn't occupy the whole of Taiwan easily. The troops taking over the island faced fierce resistance. During a 5-month period, many battles were fought. With over 33,000 Japanese soldiers killed or wounded, most of the crack household divisions of Japanese invasion troops were wiped out, with its 2 commanders being killed. Facing the national secession, the Taiwanese, without taking their lives into consideration, made rounds of stubborn and hard resistance. How noble they were! Their devotion to the country, their spirit of patriotism, bore unyielding similarity to the martyrs of the Chinese nation throughout history.
The 50-year rule of Japan over the island left a dark page in Taiwan's history, also an atrocious one in the world's colonial history. A series of laws and regulations were issued by the Japanese governor, aiming to quench the resistance of the people. They arrested and killed the people at will. The Baojia system was a method devised by the Japanese to use local people to deal with themselves. After they took over the use of the land at random, they put the daily necessities on an exclusive sales list, imposing 80 different kinds of taxes on the people to squeeze out of them all that they had. The Japanese even despised the religious invasion of the West and adopted a nation discrimination education so as to popularize the ideas and policies that upheld dedication to the Japanese emperor. The island of the motherland virtually became an utter hell.
The island was in constant turmoil. This was the objective picture of the islanders' heroic resistance to the Japanese invaders. Their battles against the Japanese were as fierce as fires. Countless people rose up in defiance of death and shed their blood for the cause against the Japanese invasion.
The Japanese paid tremendously for their occupation of the island. Intimidated by the resistance, the Japanese government replaced governors and the cabinet proposed to give up the island because of heavy losses. From this, the Taiwanese resistance against the Japanese was evidently forceful.
People will never forget a kind and brave clan, the clanman of Wu village of Gaoshan minority. In October 1930, the village, which was called the model area by the Japanese, rose up and attacked the Japanese invaders because they could not stand the ravages of the Japanese. Luo Dao, an old hero, led others and killed over 150 Japanese policemen. When the colonist force arrived, the clan came to fight against the soldiers with the determination to die on the battlefield. Many women committed suicide to alleviate their husbands' worries. In the jungles, where the Wu clan lived, the Japanese army suffered heavy losses. They had to use warplanes and cannons to shell the jungle. Without much effect, the colonist army even used poisonous gas to kill the people. With only 2,000 people, the Gaoshan minority people was not afraid of violence and fought against the Japanese soldiers bravely for 1 month. This was a miracle created by the oppressed in the history of the world.
Facing the imminent threats of World War II, the Chinese joined hands with the peace-loving people of the world to fight against the fascists. On the second day of the Pacific War, the Chinese government launched war against Japan. This is to declare war against Japan. All the treaties, agreements, and contracts involving Sino-Japanese relations are of no effect. The foreign minister made a solemn statement that after the war, the Chinese government would take back Taiwan, Penghu, and 4 provinces in the northeast.
Taiwan was no longer an abandoned baby. The island under iron hills could listen to the call of the motherland at last. In November 1943, the presidents of China, the United States, and Britain held a summit in Cairo, discussing their strategy against Japan. The Cairo Declaration, signed on December the 1st, gave the world a clear message. Deprive the islands taken by Japan in the Pacific Ocean since 1911. The territory occupied by Japan in China, such as Manchuria, Taiwan, and Penghu Islands, must be turned over forever to China. In the Potsdam Declaration in 1945, signed up by top leaders of China, the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union, reiterated that the conditions in the former declaration must be enforced. This was the just and reasonable judgment of the international community.
The people of China and the world must remember this auspicious and solemn date, September 2nd, 1945. On that day, aboard the American battleship Missouri, the Japanese foreign minister signed the surrender documents on behalf of the Japanese emperor and government. The first article of the document stipulated that Japan accept the article of the Potsdam Declaration signed on July 20th, 1945 by China, the U.S., and the UK, then joined by the USSR, and began implementing the obligations set forth. Hence, Taiwan's position became an undisputable fact as recorded by the world's most important and referent historical document. It was also Taiwan's festival. The whole island was immersed with a warm atmosphere, expressed by the traditional forms. On the morning of October 25th, a ceremony for accepting the surrender from Japan was held at the public hall of Taipei. The executive official declared, "From today on, Taiwan and Penghu Islands are formally put into China's territory. The land and the people will be under the jurisdiction of the Chinese government." The loud statement declared the end of the 50-year rule of Japan over the island. The Pearl Island returned to the arms of the motherland.
One philosopher once said, "Admit it or not, history made us and continues to control us." Whenever we turn the pages of the history book of Taiwan, what attracts us most is not its anecdotes. The pages contain glory, humiliations, wars, blood, and tears, all woven closely together. There has been no place for Taiwan's independence. Taiwan's historical position is indisputable. Anyone who claims to split the motherland will be tried in the national court.
We are reviewing the history in a solemn manner. We are also the historical figures of future pages of history. How to face ancestors guiltless and create great achievements for generations. To love our offsprings, we will strive forward, and history will not fail us.